Debate resumes. Questions without notice. Senator Chisholm. Oh, sorry, the mic. Senator Chisholm.
Thanks, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham. Under the Morrison government's current childcare scheme, a family with a full-time policeman and a physio working 3 days a week lose 91 cents in the dollar if the physio works the fourth and fifth day. Why is Mr Morrison refusing to support Labor's plan, which would see the same family more than $3,100 a year better off if they choose to work more hours?
Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks very much, Mr President, and I thank the senator for his question, for the opportunity to highlight that our government, our side of politics, has taken childcare reform very seriously over recent years. Our reforms, in terms of the application of the new childcare subsidy, provided billions of dollars in additional support that was targeted to ensure that the more hours somebody works, the greater the number of hours of subsidised childcare they and their family are entitled to. And the less that they earn, the greater the rate of subsidy that they get. Now, it seems quite remarkable that the Labor Party seem to now be adopting a policy position that is all about providing higher rates of support in terms of the childcare subsidy to those earning higher levels of income. So, Mr. President, we absolutely want to make sure that the childcare system works to support Australian families, and under our reforms, over 70% of families have out-of-pocket costs of less than $5 an hour, and nearly a quarter are paying less than $2 an hour. Nearly a quarter are paying less than $2 per hour. And those families, Mr. President, would be the lowest income Australian families. So we have targeted childcare subsidy support to give the greatest level of assistance to Australian families working the longest hours but earning the lowest amount of income. Now, the question, of course, always is, when the Labor Party comes along and says we're going to bed in the budget a whole lot of extra structural spending, guess how they'll end up paying for it? Higher taxes, no doubt. Higher taxes. This will just be some little Labor trick where they pretend to give with one hand but take with the other.
Senator Birmingham. Senator Chisholm, a supplementary question.
Yes, Mr President. Chloe from Chermside is a single mum who has been forced to say no to extra work because of the cost of childcare for her son. Why is the government blocking Queensland women like Chloe from taking on extra work in a recession?
Senator Birmingham.
Well, thanks, Mr President. And I again draw attention to the figures that I just went through that would, dependent of course upon Chloe's circumstances and Chloe's income, see very high rates of subsidy provided for the childcare fees that might be incurred. But I note that the senator hasn't tried to give any of those sorts of details. He's constructed an example that doesn't actually allow anybody to compare whether it could be an 80% or an 85% rate of subsidy that is being paid. Indeed, in special circumstances, the government pays even more than that. I hear the senators ask, where's the calculator? Well, indeed, people can go onto the relevant social services websites and they can ascertain how much support they are going to get. Yes, childcare comes at a cost, but we subsidise that cost and we give the greatest support to those earning the lowest incomes.
Senator Chisholm, a final supplementary question.
Thanks, Mr President. Why has the Morrison government budgeted $15 million for Mr Morrison's ad campaign about Australia's comeback, but included nothing in this year's budget to make childcare more affordable?
Senator Birmingham.
Well, Mr President, only the Labor Party could suggest that budgeting $9 billion for the childcare subsidy in 2020-21 was nothing. So we are budgeting $9 billion in expenditure to support childcare in this financial year alone. This is about $2 billion from memory, more than was being spent a couple of years ago prior to our reforms. So we came along as a government. We introduced reforms to create the childcare subsidy. We increased the rate of spending on childcare. That spending has now reached a point where in this financial year we will spend and invest $9 billion to support the hardest working Australian families, to give the greatest support to those earning the least amount of money, and yet those opposite come in here and they pretend that $9 billion is nothing at all. Well, it's certainly not nothing at all.
Senator Birmingham, I've got Senator Keneally on a point of order.
My point of order is relevance. The minister is almost through with his answer, and we've yet to hear about the $15 million comeback advertising campaign that the question asked about.
It was a very open-ended question. The minister is being directly relevant. Senator Birmingham, you have 5 seconds remaining.
Senator Chisholm asked, why are we giving nothing to childcare? On this side, we think $9 billion is actually quite a lot of money.
Order. Senator Fawcett.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is for the Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business, Senator Cash. Can the Minister please update the Senate on the state of the labour market following COVID-19 and how the Morrison government has supported Australians through this once-in-a-century pandemic to stay connected to the labour force and to find employment?
The Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business, Senator Cash.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Fawcett for his question. And, Mr President, as you know—
Sorry again, Senator Cash. Can you? I thought we were going to have that looked at over the weekend. We've got the same microphone problem. You are blessed with a very loud voice, Senator Cash, but I'll ask you to lean into the next microphone and we'll try and have that fixed overnight. Senator Cash.
Thank you, Mr President. I'm still just as loud. COVID-19, as you know, has had an unprecedented impact on the labour market. But new research that's been released by the National Skills Commission on the Australian labour market shows that while the impact of COVID-19 has been unprecedented, there are signs of recovery and cause for optimism for all Australians. We have begun the long road to recovery, and in fact we've seen 648,500 jobs return to the labour market since May. That is a good thing. Jobs are also returning in industries and occupations that have been impacted by COVID-19, but in particular the restrictions and the shutdowns. And what we're also seeing in regional Australia is job advertisements have been increasing by 17.6%. Mr President, in terms of the National Skills Commission and their report, it is critical to our understanding of the future of Australia's labour market. It shows where the new jobs will be created, but it also reinforces the Morrison government's work to make skills and vocational education more flexible, but also more relevant to actual labour market demand. In other words, we're actually training people to ensure that they have those skills to get into a job. Since the election, the coalition government, the Morrison government, we have focused on improving Australia's vocational education and training system. And in fact, this year alone, we will now invest almost $7 billion in vocational education and training. We'll make the changes to this sector to ensure that the training that Australians are undertaking is relevant and fit for purpose. And certainly, as we emerge from the economic impact of COVID-19, the government will utilise the National Skills Commission, which of course we legislated, to further ensure that our skills sector is properly responding to actual labour market needs.
Senator Fawcett, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, what has the National Skills Commission's research shown about which jobs are likely to see continued growth as we emerge from the economic impacts of COVID-19?
Senator Cash.
Thank you, Mr President. And insights into future job opportunities are vital to support our economic recovery, but also to ensure that more Australians are able to get back into work as quickly as possible. And that's why, with the report that the National Skills Commission has released, it's highlighted the most resilient occupations in our labour market. This is good for people who are wondering what study or training they should undertake. Will they be entering one of those industries that has shown resilience resilience despite COVID-19. And these occupations include, unsurprisingly, healthcare and social assistance, which have faced significant challenges as a result of COVID-19, but also education and training, as well as mining and construction and transport and warehousing. In terms of employment growth, it's expected to be in industries such as healthcare and social assistance, education and training, and professional, scientific and technical services over the next 5 years. Given the disruption caused by COVID-19 to the labour market, knowing that your job you're training for is going to be—
Time for the answer has expired. Senator Fawcett, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, how will the research and work of the National Skills Commission ensure that the Job Trainer Fund is as targeted and focused as possible, ensuring that people receive training in the areas where there's actually demand for work?
Senator Cash.
Well, Mr President, as you'd be aware, the Morrison government's $1 billion Job Trainer Fund, this is a crucial component of our record investment into vocational education and training, and it's also an integral part of the government's JobMaker plan. The co-investment with the states and territories, all the states and territories came on board. It's all about providing free or low-cost training to job seekers and young people, including school leavers. The key to the training, though, that we have worked individually with the states and territories to determine what their individual labour market demand is, and the job trainer courses, the free or low-cost training, they actually reflect what is in demand in the states and territories' labour markets themselves. Our goal as a government is to ensure that Australians receive qualifications in areas of skills demand. In other words, they are training for where the jobs are. You can visit yourcareer.gov.au for more information about Job Trainer.
Senator Kitching.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham. As early as January 2017, when Mr Morrison was the Treasurer, the government was aware that up to 86% of robo-debts were incorrect and needed to be reassessed. When did Mr Morrison first become aware that almost 9 out of 10 robo-debts were wrong?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, I would refer the Senate to Senator Ruston's answers on these questions.
Senator Kitching, a supplementary question. Order. Senator Kitching, on my left, Senator Kitching. Senator O'Neill. Senator Kitching is on her feet. Senator Kitching.
Thank you, Mr President. Nathan, who was called by a robo-debt collector 3 times a day, said his mental health plummeted and that, and I quote, "Sometimes they'd call and I'd tell them, like, I can't deal with this anymore, I've been thinking about taking my life," and things like that. It didn't change anything. Why did Mr Morrison continue to pursue vulnerable Australians like Nathan when he knew his robo-debt scheme was flawed and potentially invalid?
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Thanks, Senator, for her question. As Senator Ruston has made clear time and time again, the government is always willing to respond in confidence in relation to individual cases and to ensure that they are treated appropriately and assessed and handled appropriately. When senators come in here with these sorts of questions, it's difficult to respond to the personal circumstances without the full details. However, in relation to all of these matters, the government has worked through them, has worked through the different issues in relation to the debts that were raised,
Senator
and has
Watt
provided—
Senator Watt, on a point of order.
On relevance, Mr President, the question wasn't about Nathan's circumstances. The question was about why Mr Morrison continued to pursue the robo-debt program despite knowing of these problems.
Okay, I make the point again. Ministers can be directly relevant by being directly relevant to an assertion contained in a question. And while I allowed you to restate the question, Senator Watt, there, I think it's a stretch to say Senator Birmingham wasn't being directly relevant by addressing the first part and then going on to addressing the second part directly in the answer he was just giving. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Now, the government has worked through these issues and in doing so has provided payments that the Senate is well aware of to address them.
Senator Kitching, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. David from Seaford was issued a robo-debt variously calculated at $3,800, $4,088, $1,370 and $1,500 before being reduced to zero. David says, and I quote, I think I could have been one of the people who died because of this. They nearly cost me my life. When the government was told in a department brief on the 1st of March 2017 that a third of robo-debts had been reassessed and reduced to $0, why did Mr Morrison insist on putting the lives of thousands of people like David at risk?
Senator Birmingham.
Well, Mr President, once again, a number of these questions have been worked through, direct questions to Senator Ruston, questions through Senate estimates processes, and indeed what I know has occurred over a period of time is the opposition tends to take one AAT finding or one issue that might have been handed down and conflate that as something that provided conclusive proof in relation to all matters of this program. This program obviously had issues that have been dealt with and have resulted in repayments appropriately being made where necessary.
Senators Watt and O'Neill. Senator Scarr.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne. Will the minister update the Senate on the importance of Australia's relationship with Southeast Asia and the ways in which the government is strengthening our relationship with ASEAN countries?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Scarr for his question. Mr President, the government's strong view is that ASEAN is at the heart of Australia's vision for an open, inclusive and resilient Indo-Pacific region in which sovereign states are able to make independent choices. It's a vision which aligns closely with the principles set out in the ASEAN Outlook for the Indo-Pacific. And we've continued to deepen our engagement with our Southeast Asian neighbours. Indeed, at the ASEAN-Australia Summit last month, the Prime Minister announced a major investment of over $500 million in economic development and security measures to support Southeast Asia's recovery from COVID-19. It's a package which aligns with ASEAN's priorities under the ASEAN Outlook: maritime, connectivity, sustainable development, economic cooperation. We welcome the agreement also to increase the tempo of our leaders' meetings to annual summits, because that opens up a new chapter in the ASEAN-Australia Strategic Partnership. We've also signed a strategic partnership with Thailand, facilitated the entry into force of the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement with Indonesia, and agreed on a plan of action with Vietnam to deliver on our strategic partnership. I also met with Vietnam's ambassador to Australia last week and took the opportunity to particularly thank Vietnam for their leadership of ASEAN during a very difficult year concerning the impact of COVID-19 in particular, and also virtually last week with my Malaysian counterpart on Friday, Minister Hishamuddin Hussein, and thanked Malaysia for their role as our ASEAN country coordinator. Mr President, ASEAN is clearly more important than ever as we deal with the health and economic challenges that have been brought upon us by COVID-19. It is galvanising the region's response to the pandemic and particularly playing a central role in shaping how our region will emerge from the crisis. A strong ASEAN is critical to the recovery and the future prosperity of Australia and the region.
Senator
That's
Payne,
why we stand together in the challenges we face.
Expired. Senator Scarr, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Will the minister advise how the government is continuing its strong engagement with Southeast Asian partners, our Southeast Asian family, during COVID-19?
Senator Payne.
Thank you, Mr President. And again, I thank Senator Scarr because there have been constraints imposed upon us by the COVID-19 pandemic, but we have, of course, continued our strong political engagement and dialogue with our partners in the region. As well as the Prime Minister's recent virtual attendance at the ASEAN-Australia Summit this month, and also the East Asia Summit, the government has signed the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement with 14 Indo-Pacific countries under the leadership of the Trade Minister, Minister Birmingham. I've met with all of my ASEAN counterparts together 4 times since June, including a special ASEAN-Australia Foreign Ministers meeting on the 30th of June to discuss our shared COVID-19 response, as well, of course, as the annual East Asia Summit Foreign Ministers meeting and the ASEAN-related meetings, both in September. Notwithstanding limited travel this year, I visited Singapore in October, affirming the strength of our relationship, and Brunei in February. Our continued engagement across government demonstrates our strong commitment to this region.
Senator Payne. Senator Scarr, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Will the minister outline the Mekong Australia program and the ways in which it will support this important region within Southeast Asia?
Senator Payne.
Thanks, Mr President. We know that a prosperous and resilient Mekong is an important part of a strong Southeast Asia region, and that's why we'll invest in a new $232 million Mekong Australia program to support economic integration and development in the Mekong sub-region. That package announced by the Prime Minister includes investments for economic integration and development, high-quality infrastructure, support for our region's emerging security needs and for the development of maritime resources. The key elements, Mr President, include providing scholarships for emerging leaders, creating even more valuable people-to-people links, strengthening cybersecurity and critical technology capabilities, new funding to boost jobs and growth as part of the Vietnam-Australia Enhanced Economic Engagement Strategy, and opening a new liaison office in Naypyidaw in Myanmar in 2021. We're deeply committed to working with Mekong countries to manage the health and economic impacts of COVID-19 and to support economic integration and regional development.
Senator Siewert.
Mr President, my question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Cash. The 2019-20 bushfires resulted in about 450 deaths due to direct injury and air pollution exposure and sent thousands of people to hospital emergency departments with respiratory and heart problems. November was the hottest November on record. Leading health bodies, including the AMA, the Australian Nurses and Midwifery Federation, Australian College of Nursing and a majority of peak medical bodies have declared climate change a health emergency. Will the government declare the climate crisis a health emergency?
Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Cash.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator Siewert for her question. And Senator Siewert, you would be aware climate change is a global challenge for all countries, including Australia, and all of us need to take action to mitigate and adapt to its impacts. As part of the Australian government's response, the Australian government is focused on developing a sustainable and responsive health system. You have asked the Minister for Health the question, with a range of programs which can be expanded or operationalised to respond to emerging pressures, including those that are climate-related. Indeed, the Australian government released its National Climate Resilience and Adaptation Strategy in 2015, and I'm sure you are aware, Senator Siewert, that the strategy recognises that in Australia, national and subnational governments, businesses, households and communities all have different but important roles in managing climate risks, including those that impact on health and well-being. The National Disaster Risk Reduction Framework, which, as you know, was released in April of 2019, provides the big picture for the work that government, industries, business, not-for-profits, communities and individuals in Australia must do together so that we can live successfully with these hazards and the hazards that you have referred to in your question to me for decades to come. In terms of the practical steps that the government is taking, we are working with the states and territories to ensure that Australia's capacity to respond to the health impacts of climate change are appropriate and effective. And they include the Australian Health Protection Principle Committee, which has, as you are aware, identified climate change as a health protection priority. The committee has in fact asked its National Health Emergency Standing Committee to develop a national heat health framework.
Senator Siewert, a supplementary question.
Thank you. The World Health Organisation calls the climate crisis one of the greatest threats to our health. The Grattan Institute and the MJA Lancet Countdown have called it the greatest health risk facing future generations. Why doesn't Australia's long-term national health plan address the climate crisis?
Senator Cash.
Well, again, Senator Siewert, I believe I've just taken you through some of the steps that the government is undertaking in response to the issues that you have raised. As I've stated, the government in 2015 released its National Climate Resilience and Adaptation Strategy. In April 2019, the government released the National Disaster Risk Reduction Framework. In addition to that, as I've said, the government is working with the states and territories, in particular to ensure that Australia's capacity to respond to the health impacts of climate change are appropriate and effective. What I was unable to say to you in answer to your primary question was that the Australian Health Protection Principle Committee has also tasked the Environmental Health Standing Committee with reviewing the science on the health effects of prolonged smoke exposure. You raised smoke exposure in your primary question, and in fact they published a statement on the 7th of August 2020. The government is also taking action in direct response to the health impacts of the 1920 bushfire crisis.
Senator Siewert, a final supplementary question.
Thank you. Leading health researchers and health bodies are urging an accelerated response to reducing emissions and preparing health systems. Does the government agree that net zero emissions should be achieved by 2035 and that it's essential if we are to protect the health of future generations?
Good question.
Senator Cash.
Well, Senator Siewert, I refer you to the incredibly eloquent answers that the Leader of the Government in the Senate gives every time a question on this is raised. The government is committed to achieving this as soon as possible, and that is why we have put in place the practical actions that we are taking to ensure that we respond to climate change, which, as I've said, is a global challenge for all countries, including Australia. Senator Siewert, the difference between those of us on the government side of the chamber and unfortunately those in the Australian Greens is that we are putting in place practical actions to ensure that we tackle climate change. You, for some reason, just don't seem to like the practical actions that we are putting in place, and yet to date the practical actions that we have put in place are being successful.
Senator Billick.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Families and Social Services, Senator Ruston. The Royal Commission into Violence, Abuse, Neglect and Exploitation of People with Disabilities report into COVID-19 found that the Morrison government was responsible for significant failings from the onset of the pandemic. The Royal Commission heard evidence that a disabled woman was bedridden for 9 days, surviving only on muesli bars with no help for meals or care. How many Australians living with disability were left behind by the Morrison government and forced to survive without meals or care?
Minister for Families and Social Services, Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Billick for her question on what is a very important issue, and that is the respect with which we treat all Australians, but particularly those that live with disability. And for that reason, the government welcomed the interim report from the Disability Royal Commission, because we believe that everybody, absolutely everybody, but most particularly the government, has an absolute huge role to play in stamping out violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation of people with disability. And so we thank the Royal Commission for the work it does. We set up the Royal Commission because we wanted to shine a spotlight on what was going on to make sure that some of the actions of the past didn't happen into the future. But I would also acknowledge in this chamber, and hope everybody else would acknowledge in this chamber, that this year we saw a once-in-a-century pandemic hit our country, and we acted as quickly as we could with every resource that was available to government to be able to support all Australians, to make sure that in the first instance we put in place the protections, the health protections that they needed. Look, we acknowledge that the pandemic was traumatic for all Australians, but it must have been, and I'm sure it clearly was, particularly traumatic for those people who live with disability, Senator Steele-John, and I absolutely acknowledge that. But I just want to make sure that I take this opportunity to assure all Australians, but particularly Australians who live with disability or who look after and care for people with disability, that this government absolutely has them foremost in their mind, front of mind. And I mean, I'm happy to go through the list of consultations that I've had with the disability sector over the last 9 months, and I thank the amazing work of those, particularly the disability advocates, which has been an extraordinarily hard time for them. And I absolutely congratulate them for the engagement they've had with the government to make sure that we look after people with disability.
Time for the answers expired. Senator Billick, a supplementary question.
Thank you. The Royal Commission also heard evidence that another woman who went for 4 days without a support worker amid fears she and her husband had been exposed to COVID-19 said, and I quote, "I just couldn't get PPE anywhere. I saw Scott Morrison saying PPE was being provided and I was like, hello, where's mine? There was none. How many Australians living with a disability were left behind by the Morrison government when it failed to provide them with the PPE they needed to stay safe?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Well, certainly one of the things that was absolutely a priority was to make sure that we moved with great speed so that nobody got left behind and nobody was forgotten during this pandemic. But we quickly forget on the other side about how extraordinary the circumstances were that we found ourselves in March this year. And can I also acknowledge the respectful and collaborative way that those at the other end of the chamber sought to work with me to provide me with information so that I knew what was going on in the sector. They didn't seek to come in here and publicise it. And I acknowledge Senator Steele-John particularly, who picked up the phone regularly to raise issues with me of great concern to him, and we did our best to make sure that we resolved those. But I'd also point out, just as a matter of some interest, that the Royal Commission did not speak to probably what I consider the two most senior public servants. They did not speak to the Deputy Secretary of Disability or the CEO of the NDIA to get more information about the issues.
Senator Ruston. The noise level's getting a little bit loud, colleagues. Senator Billick, final
Thank you. And if that's your best work, I'm a bit worried. Under the Morrison government, vulnerable Australians, from those in residential aged care to those living with disabilities, have been left neglected and abandoned by Mr Morrison. Why is Mr Morrison leaving Australians living with a disability behind and failing to keep them safe?
Senator Ruston.
Well, I would completely reject the premise of the question that has just been asked of me, because I can assure you that the Morrison government has worked tirelessly to make sure that no Australian would be left behind. But as we recognise the situation that we all found ourselves in this year, it was a once-in-a-century pandemic. However, I can tell you what I did as the minister who has broader responsibility for disability as opposed to the NDIS, that I worked with the disability sector. I had numerous meetings, and I'd like to shout out Ben Gauntlett, who's our Disability Discrimination Commissioner, for the extraordinary hard work that they did, along with the advocacy groups, to make sure that the voices of people with disability were heard during this time so that we could respond to the specific needs, because clearly every Australian was faced with a situation that they had never seen before, and we worked very, very well with the disability sector, and I acknowledge the huge amount of support they gave me.
Senator Ruston. Senator Hanson.
Thank you very much. My question is addressed to Senator Ruston, representing the Minister for Resources, Water and Northern Australia. The Australian government used the weakest gas laws in the world to attract foreign oil and gas companies to exploit Australia's offshore deposits of natural gas. The government now receives approximately $200 million a year for the offshore natural gas taken from the North West Shelf, which drives tens of billions of dollars of exports, including to China, where we supply 10% of their total energy requirements. Failure to get a fair payment for our offshore gas represents a gift of billions of dollars a year to foreign oil and gas companies, money better spent on Australians. What has stopped the government implementing the single recommendation of the 2017 Callaghan report so Australia can be fairly paid for its offshore gas?
The Minister representing the Minister for Resources, Water and Northern Australia, Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Hanson for a question. And at the outset, can I acknowledge your long-standing and passionate commitment to ensuring that Australians are the beneficiary of our nation's endowment of natural resources. And the government has worked very hard to strengthen the integrity of the petroleum resource and rent tax by addressing the design issues that were contained within the Callaghan independent review. In fact, the government brought down its response to the Callaghan review on the 2nd of November 2018, and in that we then worked to make sure that we implemented many of the recommendations that were contained in that review. Things like reducing the uplift rates that apply to carried forward expenditure. We've also set up a process to address the remaining recommendations relating to the gas transfer pricing for LNG projects. Indeed, legislation giving effect to the key changes came into force on the 1st of July 2019 and will raise an additional $6 billion over the next decade. We are absolutely committed to supporting the resource sector, which has invested over $600 billion in Australian projects over the last decade. But in doing so, we need to make sure that we strike the balance between making sure that investors around the world know that Australia's doors are open for investment, but at the same time making sure that the national interest is being realised by making sure Australians are the beneficiary of our resources. So foreign direct investment has been an absolutely enduring feature of our national story. And oil and gas industry is one of those industries that has been absolutely at the forefront of making sure that we are able to prosper as a nation by realising the value of the resources that we have in the ground, whether it be under our terrestrial soils or under the sea. And we will make sure that the national interest is always served.
Order. Senator Hanson, a supplementary question.
Minister, I understand it's not your portfolio, but that response is, I'm sorry, it's not a response at all. The government advised Papua New Guinea on its gas laws. They got a better deal from the same gas giants operating on the northwest shelf. If we can help PNG negotiate fair payment for natural gas, why can't we do it ourselves?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I would thank Senator Hanson for her follow-up question. Well, I believe that the Australian government, through a number of regimes, has always sought to make sure that Australians are the beneficiaries of the resources that belong to all Australians. And that's why we made sure that with the petroleum resource rent tax that was brought in by those opposite back in 1987 to make sure that we put in place a regime around Australia to make sure that these projects were providing benefit to Australians, which most importantly included increasing the taxation revenue that Australia was able to achieve it. I mean, as an example, the most recent data available from the Australian Tax Office says that the resources sector paid approximately $11.4 billion in company tax in 2017-18, and I'm advised that in 2018 Woodside alone paid $555 million in Australian corporate income tax.
Order. Senator Ruston. Senator Hanson, a final supplementary question.
Thank you very much. It's estimated that we actually export about $55 billion worth of gas. We actually have Chevron, ExxonMobil and Shell actually only have about $360 billion in tax credits. We're not going to get tax out of them. So, and the Reserve Bank says Australians need to buy shares in foreign gas companies or work for them to get any benefit for Australian-owned offshore gas. When will the government act in the best interest of Australians and change laws?
Thank you very much, Mr President. Senator Hanson, I'm actually not aware of the specific piece of advice you refer to from the Reserve Bank, but one thing I can advise the chamber is that resource companies operating in Australia in our mineral and petroleum industries are subject to corporate income tax. And as I said, in 2017-18 alone, $11.4 billion came into the Australian government coffers as a result of the taxation that was paid by the mineral and petroleum industries. Royalty revenues also are received by state and territory governments for onshore mineral and petroleum production, and my understanding is that in the years 18-19, approximately $14 billion was realised by state and territory governments in royalty revenues from these types of projects. So, maintaining a stable investment environment, including through our taxation system, is absolutely vital in ensuring we can continue to prosecute our resources for the benefit of all Australians.
Senator Ruston. Senator Abetz.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Defence. Can the Minister update the Senate on what support Defence has provided to international partners across the Indo-Pacific during COVID-19?
The Minister for Defence, Senator Reynolds.
Well, thank you very much, Mr President, and I also thank Senator Abetz for that question, and I also thank you for your enduring support for our men and women in uniform and also for defence. Building a stronger Australia post-pandemic rests on a secure and stable Indo-Pacific. That's why Defence is supporting not only our own national recovery from COVID-19, but also the recovery of our regional friends and partners. We have already reorientated funding through the government's defence cooperation programs to assist our regional partners deal with COVID-19. This is in addition to the significant support that the ADF have provided on Operation COVID-19 Assist. Now, over 10,000 ADF members have been contributing to state and territory responses since the beginning of this year. But in the South Pacific, our support has focused on very targeted country-specific priorities. This includes planning, health, logistics, vehicle and asset maintenance, the delivery of personal PPE and also supplies. In Southeast Asia, Australia has supported regional defence forces to respond to the pandemic. A couple of examples include a $2 million package of personal protective equipment to Indonesia's armed forces to support their assistance and their ability to deal with their own nation's COVID-19 response. Secondly, a second example is a total of $3 million of assistance to the armed forces of the Philippines to enable their ongoing support to infectious disease wards across the country and support their own armed forces personnel. And in the Indian Ocean region, we provided personal protective equipment for the Defence Forces of Bangladesh, Sri Lanka and also the Maldives. Defence stands firmly with its regional partners during these most challenging of times for us all.
Senator Abetz, a supplementary question.
Yes, Mr President. I thank the Minister for that answer and ask the following. Can the Minister update the Senate on the continuation of Defence regional operations and activities during COVID-19?
Senator Reynolds.
Again, thank you very much, Mr President, and Senator Abetz for the question. Throughout COVID-19, one of the proudest things that our nation has seen is the fact that the ADF have not missed a beat. Yes, we've had to adapt work practices, but we have not missed a beat throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. And during that time, Australia has continued to strengthen its military-to-military engagement with our partners who share our vision for a stable, prosperous and rules-based Indo-Pacific. This is despite the many challenges facing us all with COVID-19. For example, our regional presence deployment, which ran from July to September, was the largest ever ADF deployment to the Indo-Pacific, and we exercised with 11 nations in total. Navy has also conducted 7 separate maritime activities with Japan alone this year. Australia participated in the maritime exercise Malabar last month with our close partners India, Japan and the United States, and those exercises continue.
Senator Keneally. Oh, sorry, Senator Abetz. Final supplementary question. I'd miscount.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the Minister update the Senate on how Defence is maintaining close engagement with Australia's Pacific family during COVID-19?
Senator Abetz. Sorry, Senator, I'm having a bad run today. Senator Reynolds.
I can answer my own question if you like.
Senator Reynolds.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I'm sure Senator Abetz is very capable of answering his own questions. But in all seriousness, Defence is continuing to support our Pacific family to address the health and economic challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. Work continues apace with Papua New Guinea, Fiji and Vanuatu on significant defence infrastructure projects in those nations, projects that enhance security and also provide much-needed economic stimulus and local employment opportunities in those nations. Those projects in those 3 countries alone are expected to create over 350 jobs in Papua New Guinea, 555 jobs in Fiji and 178 jobs in Vanuatu, with many more to come. Defence continues to deliver new Guardian-class patrol boats throughout COVID-19, 8 to date to regional partners under the Pacific Maritime Security Program, and in fact Tonga received its 2nd Guardian-class patrol boat during a COVID-safe handover at Henderson in October. This program fundamentally supports regional sovereignty.
Senator Keneally.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Minister Payne. Laura, who is stranded in Spain and wants to come home, has had her status changed by DFAT to, quote, not seeking to return to Australia, despite making it clear to a caller from DFAT that she was trying to return as soon as possible and had flights booked in coming weeks. She has said, and I quote, I can't shake the feeling the reclassifications on the DFAT portal are a cynical drive to deliver the government a Christmas miracle. Why isn't the Prime Minister setting up a national quarantine facility at Learmonth or other locations so stranded Australians can get home before Christmas, as he promised, instead of cooking the books to make it look like they don't want to be home by Christmas?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and thanks Senator Kinley for her question, and absolutely reject any suggestion that members of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade or any other public servants who are engaged in the consultation with Australians about their current status are cooking the books, to use her pejorative term, Mr President. Let me be very clear. DFAT will not remove any Australians from its registration database without their consent. I am not familiar with the specific example to which Senator Keneally has referred, but I will undertake to take details from her after question time and follow that up. What we have done, Mr President, is to work with Services Australia to contact registered Australians to ensure that the information we have in our database is up to date and correct. Having detailed information assists us with planning for facilitated commercial flights. That includes the Qantas flight, Mr President, that arrived in Hobart yesterday from New Delhi. It also helps us to prioritise vulnerable Australians within the caps on incoming passenger arrivals. I don't know how those opposites suggest that we actually manage this process without having the most current information, Mr President, without having up-to-date data from Australians. We are in the middle of a global pandemic, Mr President, and people's circumstances do and are changing very quickly. Within the registration database, there are different status fields related to Australians' intentions to return. We will only change their status on their behalf based on information that has been provided to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and as I said, we will not remove Australians from our registration database without their consent. Mr President, this is a very intensive process to try to support as many Australians as we can. Since the 18th of September, over 43,800 Australians have returned from overseas. That includes more than 17,000 Australians registered
Senator
with DFAT,
Payne,
of which—
time for the answer has expired. Senator Keneally, a supplementary question.
It has been 80 days since the Prime Minister promised the 26,000 stranded Australians on DFAT's list that they would be home by Christmas. Only 17,000 on that list have come home. Given the Prime Minister only has 3 days to deliver on his promise and bring the remaining stranded Australians on DFAT's list as of the 18th of September home by Christmas, how many of those stranded Australians will not make it home by Christmas?
Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President. And as Senator Keneally has observed, and as I said in my previous answer, over 43,800 Australians have returned from overseas, which includes more than 17,000 Australians registered with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And of those, over 3,700 were vulnerable, Mr President. We have been seeking information from those Australians to ensure that we are able to assist them with the most up-to-date and timely information. Since the 23rd of October, we have facilitated 13 commercial flights, returning 1,847 passengers. In the last 4 weeks alone, Mr President, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade has made over 30,000 offers of places on flights to Australians registered overseas. This is a very complex process to assist Australians who are in very difficult circumstances in many cases. I absolutely acknowledge that, Mr President. But since the 18th of September, at least 43,000 Australians have been able to return from overseas.
The answer has expired. Senator Keneally, final supplementary question.
Why is it that Mr Morrison prioritises flying his mate, former Finance Minister Matthias Cormann, around Europe to the tune of $4,300 an hour, while tens of thousands of Australians are left behind overseas by his government?
Senator Payne.
Mr President, as I understand it, and we are grateful for that support, those opposites support the very important campaign to seek the election of Matthias Cormann to lead the OECD at a time, Mr President, when the world needs strong leadership such as that Mr Cormann would deliver. The OECD has never been led by anybody from our region, Mr President, but it does beggar the imagination, Mr President, that those opposite
would seek to conflate their cheap political point with the important process of getting Australians back to Australia. And I would suggest, Mr President, that the effort that the consular officers of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, that the effort of officials are making to return Australians literally in every capital where Australians are located and to support them is a very, very focused and conscientious one, Mr President. But we are operating in the middle of a pandemic, Mr President. We are operating with quarantine caps, we are operating with flight restrictions, and we have returned
Senator
over
Payne, time for the
43,800
answer has
Australians
expired. Order on my left and my right. Senator Dean Smith.
Mr President, my question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Cash. Could the Minister advise the Senate how the Morrison government's health response to COVID-19 is helping to underpin our economic recovery and secure Australia's future?
The Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Cash.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator Smith for his question. Mr President, we know that around the world, globally, COVID-19 is continuing to spread. Globally, we have now reached 66.4 million COVID-19 cases, and sadly, we have lost 1.5 million lives. We see that outside of Australia, the challenge of COVID-19 is significant and it is tragic. But when we look at the situation here in Australia, compared with other developed nations, we are in Australia in a very good position. In the United States, for example, the death rate is 23.9 times what we have seen in Australia. In the United Kingdom, the death rate is over 25 times what we have seen in Australia. So our success in managing the health crisis as a country and as a government has built the foundation for our economic recovery. We've had real challenges and genuine loss, but in terms of the outcome that we are currently seeing in Australia, it is certainly one which other parts of the world envy. In Australia, we have now had 27,965 confirmed cases of COVID-19, and sadly 908 deaths. As of 4 p.m. yesterday, we have had 0 cases of community transmission in the past 24 hours, and certainly that is a good thing. In terms of our response to COVID-19, more than $18.5 billion has been committed to support the emergency COVID-19 health response. As a government, as you know, we took early action to close the borders and institute quarantine arrangements. We've established 147 GP respiratory clinics, and we've now conducted more than 10.1 million tests in Australia since the pandemic commenced.
Senator Smith, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the Minister explain how the testing capacity of Australia supported this health outcome, which is enabling our economic comeback?
Senator Cash.
Thank you, Senator Smith. And certainly, in terms of the testing, as I've said, Australia has now conducted over 10.1 million COVID-19 tests. This has indeed been a critical component of our health success and our ability to track, trace and, as we've seen by the statistics that I've referred the Senate to, contain the COVID-19 virus. In terms of the work that our health agencies have undertaken to build testing capacity, it is quite remarkable, and certainly we congratulate them. When you consider that in January of this year, there was no such thing as a COVID-19 test. So when you look at the work of our health agencies and the fact that Australia has now conducted in excess of 10.1 million tests, they certainly deserve our thanks. Mr President, we've also taken a number of steps to ensure that we could build this capacity, including putting in place Medicare funding for COVID-19 tests and sourcing the materials needed to keep our testing supplies.
Senator Smith, final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. How will the Morrison government's approach to securing and rolling out a COVID-19 vaccine ensure that Australians are safe and position our economy for recovery from a COVID-19 recession?
Senator Cash.
Well, Mr President, when you look at the situation in Australia today, and certainly compared to the rest of the world, it enables us to take precautions when it comes to rolling out the COVID-19 vaccine. While there are rapid rollouts, and we've certainly seen them announced last week around the world, the situation here in Australia is quite different. In fact, it's quite unique. Locally, the Therapeutic Goods Administration has given a priority assessment to 3 different vaccines. The TGA is currently assessing all of the available medical evidence of these vaccines to verify that they are indeed safe for use in Australia. The safety of the vaccine program is, of course, our top priority as a government. We've made a deliberate decision to diversify our vaccine portfolio with a range of vaccines and all of the different data. The rollout of the Pfizer vaccine in the United Kingdom will provide us with additional information to assess the safety of the rollout of the vaccine in Australia.
Senator Cash. Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr President. My question this afternoon is to the Minister for Youth and Sport, Senator Colbeck. A report out today from the Brotherhood of St Lawrence states that youth employment was, and I quote, already stubbornly high before COVID. Can the minister confirm the report's finding that 1 in 3 young Australians are unable to find any work or don't have enough hours of work to make ends meet?
The Minister for Youth and Sport, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President, and thanks, Senator, for the question. And as I said in the chamber here last week, the youth unemployment rate at 15.6% is too high. That's why this government has invested so much, which we have been criticised for by the opposition, in measures to support younger Australians to get back to work, Mr President. In fact, in some of those measures, Mr President, the opposition's actually voted against those measures in this place, Mr President. And so, Mr President, we recognised that the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic was going to be significant on younger Australians, Mr President. And so that's why, as we've worked our way through the COVID pandemic, and in the budget that we released just a few weeks ago, we had such a significant effort that was focused towards getting younger Australians back to work, Mr President. Mr President, we invested $4 billion, Mr President, in the JobMaker hiring credit, Mr President. Mr President, we invested significant amount of money to provide a 50% wage subsidy for apprentices who were starting a new apprenticeship, new apprentices in businesses, or recommencing, Mr President. We want to keep younger Australians connected with their employers, and we want to provide incentives for employers to employ younger Australians, because we know the longer-term effects of unemployment for younger Australians have a significant impact on their financial capacity over a period of time. Well, Mr President, I'll take the interjection, and that's exactly how I started my answer. The unemployment rate at 15.6% is too high. I have acknowledged that, Mr President. We've just been through a pandemic, Mr President, a global pandemic, which is having a disproportionate impact on younger Australians, Mr President, and so that's why this government has invested so heavily in measures to assist younger Australians.
Senator Pratt, a supplementary question.
How many young Australians could have been spared from the unemployment queues if the Morrison government had not excluded so many of them from JobKeeper?
Senator Colbeck.
Mr President, the measures that we've put in place to assist younger Australians back into work are just not about one single measure. We have invested in a number of measures to assist employers to take on younger Australians. We were criticised for focusing too much on younger Australians in our budget only a few weeks ago, Mr President, by those on the other side, Mr President. They forget what they were saying just a few weeks ago, Mr President, when they were criticising our budget for being so heavily focused on younger Australians and assisting younger Australians to get back into work, and all of the programs that we put into place, Mr President. We make no apology for focusing on younger Australians to get back to work. We recognise, as I said just a moment ago, Mr President, that the impact on younger Australians who don't have work when they're young is over a longer period of time and more significant. And we will do everything that we can to assist employers to get younger people back into
Senator
work.
Colbeck. Senator Pratt, a final supplementary question.
How many young Australians are underemployed, and when does the government predict that the number will drop back to pre-pandemic levels?
Senator Colbeck.
Mr President, as the many measures that we've put in place to support younger Australians to get back into work, the unemployment rate will continue to improve. In fact, in some states it has improved over the recent period of announcement, Mr President. So in my home state of Tasmania, for example, the youth unemployment rate actually reduced over the last reporting period.
Point of order.
Point of order is relevance. The minister is providing an answer about unemployment. The question was actually about underemployment. It asked specifically how many young Australians are underemployed. I ask you to direct the minister to be relevant to the question.
This was. This is where the test. Order. This is where the test of direct relevance, in my view, needs to be much more strictly applied than the test of relevance. It was a specific question that asked for a number without any what I'd call loaded or pejorative phrases. So to be directly relevant, in my view, the minister needs to address the issue of what was raised in the question because it was specific and factual in nature. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Thank you, Mr President. And as I said, the measures that we put in place in the budget are designed to increase employment in younger Australians, to get younger Australians back to work and to encourage employers, specifically encourage employers to employ younger Australians. And we will continue to focus in that area because we understand what an important part of the economy.
Senator Colbeck. I have Senator Keneally on a point of order.
Thank you, and I acknowledge your ruling, and I realise the minister only has 14 seconds left, so we would appreciate if he could answer the question, how many young Australians are underemployed?
On this particular issue, Senator Colbeck, I am going to ask that you to come to the question that was factual in nature, because there has been a period of time to comment more broadly. And there was no political content to the question. Senator Colbeck, or have you concluded your answer?
No.
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. As I've said a number of times today, the number of people who are unemployed, and I'll add to that the number of young people who are underemployed, is too large. That is why we're investing so significantly, Mr President.
Order. Senator Colbeck. Senator Keneally.
Thank you. I acknowledge your previous rulings about the relationship between unemployment and underemployment, but the minister is again talking about unemployment. This question is, as you have pointed out, quite specific. How many young Australians are underemployed? We asked the minister in the last 5 seconds to answer the question.
Order. The minister did mention. I'll answer the point of order when there's silence. It's only Monday, everyone. Now, on the point of order, Senator Keneally, the minister did mention underemployment then, as you got to your feet. I did hear him talk about both. However, I have not had to ask a minister to stop answering a question, but when I have a specific question that says how many are and when will it return, that is factual in nature, without any political loading or phrasing in the question, that requires an answer to be directly relevant. A directly relevant answer is not a broad commentary on the topic. So I'm going to remind ministers of that, because I've always said if questions are specific in nature without political phrasing, then directly relevant is a very strict test. Where questions actually include arguable phrases and loaded terminology, ministers are allowed to respond in kind. But this was a very specific question about how many and when shall it return, without loading, and I'm happy to be corrected if the Hansard shows me otherwise. So I asked the minister to be very specific. Ministers always have the ability to take it on notice. And we have 5 seconds remaining. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. And the rate will return to previous levels as the measures that we have put in place come to pass.
Firstly, I'm going to take the point of order, but Senator Keneally, he was talking about the timing of the rate of when the rate would return. That was directly relevant. That was actually the phrasing of the second part of the question. I cannot instruct the minister how to answer a question Senator Keneally.
Thank you, Mr President. Noting your previous ruling and your comments and your advice to the minister that he take it on notice.
That wasn't my advice. I said ministers have the option, Senator Keneally.
Your observation that the minister could take it on notice, given that the minister has not advised the House, the Chamber of the number.
Senator Keneally, this isn't a point of order. This is not a point of order, Senator Keneally.
I would ask
Senator
that he
Keneally,
take it
this
on
is not a
notice.
point of order. There's a time after question time. The minister was being directly relevant after my final ruling there, talking about timing. The time ran out. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Will I ask, and indeed particularly invite the opposition if they wish, to place further questions on notice?